Two empty picture frames hung on a museum wall in Boston. They were not normal frames. They were big, fancy, and gold. But inside there was nothing, just blank space. Like someone had ripped the heart out of the room and left the shell behind. A security guard named Rick stared at the frames with wide eyes. His mouth was open, but no words came out. Another guard, Randy, stood nearby, pale and shaking. The quiet of the museum felt loud, like the building itself was holding its breath. A police officer walked in and stopped cold. "Where are the paintings?" he asked. Rick's voice came out small. "They're gone," he whispered. "They took them." The officer looked around. The walls had looked like a treasure room just hours ago. Now it felt like a crime scene. The air smelled like dust and old wood. The lights were still on. Nothing was broken. No alarms were screaming. But the most valuable art was missing. Millions of dollars in art gone in the night. And the worst part was this. No one could say exactly who did it. No clear faces. No names. No suspects. Only one terrifying truth remained. Somebody had walked into one of the most famous museums in Boston and stolen world-famous masterpieces. Like it was easy. Rick swallowed hard, staring at the empty frames again. Then he said the sentence that made everyone in the room go quiet. They were dressed like police. And right then the officer leaned closer and asked, "Rick, what did you let them do?" Rick opened his mouth to answer, and that answer would change everything. A few days earlier, Boston felt normal. It was March. The air was cold and sharp. Cars rolled over wet streets. People hurried inside warm buildings. The Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum sat quietly like it always did, filled with paintings, sculptures, and beautiful rooms that looked like they belonged in another time. Inside, the museum was calm and peaceful. Visitors walked slowly, whispering as they moved from room to room. Some stared at the art like it was magic. Some just enjoyed the quiet. At night, the museum became even quieter. That's when the guards took over. Rick and Randy were not famous. They were normal guys doing a job. They watched security screens. They walked the halls. They locked doors. They followed rules. The rules were simple. If someone knocked and said they were police, you still didn't open the door unless it was confirmed. Museums had strict policies for a reason, but it was late, and late nights can make people tired. Tired people make mistakes. On the night of the heist, Rick stood at the front desk. The building was still. The museum felt like a sleeping giant. Randy was nearby, checking screens and making notes. Then the buzzer rang. Rick looked up at the monitor. Two men stood at the door. They wore police uniforms. One looked serious. The other looked calm. They stood like they belonged there. Rick pressed the intercom button. "Can I help you?" he asked. One of the men spoke in a confident voice. "We got a call," he said. "We need to come in." Rick's heart beat faster. "A call? From who? About what?" He hesitated. The man leaned closer to the camera, as if to make it easier. "It's routine," he said. "Open up." Rick looked at Randy. Randy shrugged, unsure. This was the moment where the rules mattered most. Rick should have called and confirmed. He should have waited. He should have followed the plan. But the uniforms looked real. The badges looked real. And the men's voices sounded like they meant business. Rick unlocked the door. The two police officers stepped inside, and the cold air followed them. Their shoes clicked softly on the floor. They didn't look around like tourists. They moved like they had a purpose. Rick forced a small smile. "How can we help?" he asked. One of the men looked directly at him. "We need to check something," he said. "Can you step out from behind the desk?" Rick did what he was told. Then the man said, "You look familiar." Rick blinked. "Me?" "Yeah." The man said, "There's a warrant out. Come here." Rick's stomach dropped. "What? No, there isn't." Before Rick could finish, the man grabbed his arm. Randy stepped forward. "Hey, what's going on?" he asked. The second officer turned to Randy, calm as ice. "Don't move," he said. Rick's mind raced. Something was wrong. Something was very wrong. Because real police didn't act like this. Real police didn't walk into a museum in the middle of the night and start grabbing guards. Rick tried to pull back. The man tightened his grip and said in a low voice, "This is a robbery. Don't make it worse." Rick froze. Randy froze too. It was like the whole world stopped, and the only thing left was fear. The fake officer pulled out handcuffs. Rick's eyes widened. "Wait, please." But the cuffs snapped shut, and as Rick's hands were locked behind his back, the police officer leaned in and whispered, almost like a warning, "Be quiet and you'll be fine." Then he turned his head toward the dark hallway leading into museum galleries and said, "Let's go." And that was the moment the heist truly began. The handcuffs bit into Rick's wrists. He tried to keep his breathing quiet, but it came out shaky. Randy stood frozen near the desk, his face white like paper. The two men in police uniforms looked calm, like this was an ordinary night for them. One of them spoke softly, almost friendly. "No one has to get hurt," he said. "Just do what we say." Rick nodded fast. He didn't want trouble. He didn't want anyone to get hurt. He wanted this to be over. The second man pointed at Randy. "You too," he said. "Step closer." Randy raised his hands slowly. "Okay," he whispered. The man cuffed Randy as well. Then he guided both guards away from the desk and into a small room. The room was not far. It was used for security and storage. The men moved with confidence, like they already knew where everything was. Rick's heart pounded. How do they know this place? He wondered. Inside the room, the fake officers pulled out gray duct tape. Rick's eyes widened. "Please," he said. "We won't fight." "I know," the man replied. "That's good." They taped the guards' hands and feet, so they couldn't move. Then they taped their mouths, leaving only their noses free so they could breathe. Rick tried to speak, but it came out as a muffled sound. The men didn't laugh. They didn't shout. They didn't seem excited. They acted like this was a job, and they were doing it carefully. Then one of them said, "Now we have time." Time. That word made Rick's stomach twist. Because if the thieves had time, it meant they were not rushing. They were not panicking. They planned this. The men walked out and closed the door, leaving Rick and Randy on the floor in the dark. Rick could hear faint footsteps fading away. Then silence. For a moment, Rick wondered if he was dreaming. But the tape on his mouth and the tight cuffs reminded him this was real. He tried to shift, to roll, to reach something, anything. Randy made a quiet sound, like a sob. Rick turned his head and looked at him. Randy's eyes were wet. He was terrified. Rick wanted to say, "It'll be okay," but he couldn't speak. All he could do was listen. And he listened as the thieves moved to the museum like shadows. In another part of the museum, the thieves entered the galleries. The Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum was not like a modern building with bright lights and clean white walls. It had an old-world feel. Deep colors, rich wood, velvet ropes, frames that looked like gold crowns. The art was priceless. Paintings that people traveled across the country to see. Paintings that belonged to history. The thieves walked like they had a plan. One carried a small bag. The other looked around as if he knew which cameras to avoid. They didn't grab everything. They chose. That was the scary part. They stopped in front of a famous painting by Rembrandt. In it, a figure stood in dark clothing, painted with amazing detail. The thief pulled out a blade. With slow, careful movements, he cut the canvas right out of frame. Not the whole frame, just the painting. The empty frame stayed on the wall like a silent scream. Then they moved to another Rembrandt painting. Another cut, another empty frame. In another room, they took a painting by Vermeer. Small, quiet, beautiful. Then another. They worked for a long time, moving from room to room, selecting what they wanted. It wasn't messy. It wasn't wild. It was controlled. Rick lay on the floor and listened to the faint sounds. Footsteps, a scrape, soft tearing, the whisper of fabric. He tried to count minutes in his head, but fear made time feel strange. Sometimes it felt like hours. Sometimes like seconds. Randy's breathing grew fast and shallow. Rick wanted to calm him down, but he couldn't. Then, from far away, Rick heard something that made his stomach drop even more. A faint beep, a security sound. Rick's eyes went wide. Did an alarm go off? He thought. Then he heard footsteps running, quick, urgent. But they weren't the thieves. They sounded like a guard. Rick's heart jumped. Someone else is here. Then the footsteps stopped. A voice echoed in the hallway. "Hello," someone called. Rick's eyes filled with desperate hope. A third guard? A police officer? Anyone? Rick tried to yell through the tape. MMM. Randy did the same. The voice came closer. Then another voice answered it, calm and firm. "Police," the thief said. "Everything's fine." Rick froze. Oh no, the thieves were going to trick someone else. Footsteps moved closer to the security room door. Rick's heart hammered, so hard it felt like it would burst. The door handle rattled. Then the door opened. A young guard stood there, his eyes confused. He was new. He looked from Rick to Randy on the floor, taped and cuffed. His mouth open in shock. Before he could shout, one of the thieves stepped behind him, and the guard vanished out of the doorway in a fast struggle. No screams, just sudden movement. The door slammed shut again. Rick's eyes widened in horror. Randy shook his head violently, muffled sobs escaping his taped mouth. Rick's mind screamed, "No, no, no." Then the door opened again. One thief came in and knelt beside Rick, his face close. "You almost got lucky," the thief whispered. Rick stared back, helpless. The thief's eyes were cold. "No more surprises," he said. Then he stood up and walked out. And this time, Rick heard something worse than footsteps. He heard the sound of the museum's main door opening again, which meant the thieves were leaving, with the art, and no one had stopped them. The museum went quiet again. Too quiet. Rick lay on the cold floor, his heart pounding so hard it hurt. The sounds of footsteps faded. Then there was nothing. No voices. No movement. Just the hum of the building and his own breathing. The thieves were gone. Minutes passed. Or maybe hours. Time felt broken. Rick twisted his wrists, feeling the tape pull at his skin. His hands were numb, but he kept moving them little by little. Randy was doing the same, rocking slightly, trying not to panic. Finally, Rick felt the tape loosen just enough. He rubbed his hands together hard, working the tape away. His fingers burned, but he didn't stop. When his hands were free, he pulled the tape from his mouth and sucked in a deep breath. "Randy," he whispered, "hold still." Rick crawled over and untapped Randy's mouth, then his hands. They sat there for a second, breathing fast, staring at each other in shock. Then Randy said the words Rick had been thinking. "They're gone." Rick nodded. "Yeah." They got to their feet, shaky and slow, and rushed toward the front desk. Rick grabbed the phone with trembling hands and dialed. "This is the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum," he said, his voice breaking. "We've been robbed. Please send police. Now." Within minutes, sirens filled the night. Red and blue lights flashed against the museum walls. Officers poured inside. Detectives followed. People asked questions all at once. What happened? How many? What did they take? Did you see their faces? Rick tried to answer, but the words fell heavy. They looked like police, he said again and again. They knew the place. The officers moved through the galleries. That's when everyone saw it, the empty frames. They hung on the walls like ghosts. Gold frames with nothing inside. Paintings that had been there for decades were gone, leaving only marks where they once hung. A detective named Mark stood still in front of one frame. He shook his head slowly. "This is bad," he said. Another officer whispered, "Do you know what these were worth?" Mark nodded. "Millions." By morning, the story was everywhere. Boston Art Heist. Masterpieces stolen. No suspects. Reporters crowded outside the museum. Cameras flashed. Headlines grew bigger with every hour. Experts came in to study the crime. They walked the galleries, taking notes, pointing at frames, whispering to each other. This wasn't random, one expert said. They knew exactly what to take. Another added, this was planned for a long time. The list of stolen art shocked the world. Paintings by Rembrandt, a rare Vermeer, works that could never truly be replaced. The museum closed its doors. The city asked questions. How could this happen? Why didn't the alarm stop them? Who were they? Police search for answers. They check security footage. But the cameras had blind spots. They searched records. No matching police calls. No matching officers. They questioned Rick and Randy again and again. Both told the same story. Two men, police uniforms, calm voices, no names. Sketch artists tried to draw the thieves from memory, but the faces were too plain, too forgettable. Weeks passed, then months. Tips came in from all over the country. Some people claimed they saw the art. Some claimed they knew who took it. Most tips led nowhere. The thieves had vanished. Years passed. The empty frames stayed. The museum decided to leave them on the walls, just as they were, not to forget, not to hide what happened. Visitors stood in front of the frames, staring at the empty space, trying to imagine what was missing. Rick quit his job not long after. He couldn't stop replaying that night in his head. The buzzer, the uniforms, the moment he unlocked the door. One choice, one mistake. Randy moved away from Boston. He said he needed a fresh start. Detective Mark stayed on the case for years. Every new tip brought a spark of hope. Every dead end brought silence again. The stolen art was valued at hundreds of millions of dollars. But no arrests were ever made. No paintings were ever returned. No suspects were ever charged. The Boston Art Heist became one of the greatest unsolved crimes in American history. People still ask the same questions. Where's the art? Who took it? Will it ever come back? The truth is simple and terrifying. Someone walked into a museum dressed as police. They took priceless art. They walked out into the night. And they were never caught. The empty frames still hang there today, waiting